Back in the day when I was a little girl, I used to go down to the corner market, and there was this lady, and her name was Cecile, and she used to make the most delightful bagels. But you gotta know that bagels can be used for everything. As my mom always used to say, a bagel a day keeps the doctor away. Recipe here that I've got, but first I've got to talk about my boring life for another 10 minutes before I actually give you the recipe.
Stop! Ain't nobody care about your life story. We don't have time for convoluted ads. We don't have time to read a book. We just want the recipe. So today I'm going to give you a quick recipe on how to make some delicious bagels for your household. No nonsense. Welcome back to the Misty Mushroom. So today's bagel recipe. The following ingredients will be required. 300 milliliters of warm water, 2 teaspoons of yeast, 4.5 teaspoons of sugar, 3.5 cups of bread flour, and 1.5 teaspoons of salt. You will need also a small pot to boil the bagels before baking them, a baking sheet, 1 egg to gloss the bagels, any seasoning that you'd like to utilize, and a glass or plastic bowl to store the dough in while it rises. Although I have a mixer that makes this process a little bit easier, you can still incorporate the ingredients by hand without any fancy equipment. I try to get away with using the least amount of equipment possible to make this. So let's start out with the warm water. It's about lukewarm. 300 milliliters goes into the basin. I then like to add the 2 teaspoons of yeast. That's just an active yeast. You could let this sit for a good 5-10 minutes for the yeast to activate. Then like to add the 4.5 teaspoons of sugar. I like to add that to kind of rejuvenate that yeast and get it active. Then I start adding the flour. Now for my household, I just have the regular all-purpose flour. Bread flour is generally better, has a better consistency of gluten for the bread, and will yield better results. However, you can get away with just all-purpose flour. So I'm going to put in first 3 cups of flour. And then I'm going to go ahead and add in the teaspoon of salt. That is 1.5 teaspoons. It goes in to help kind of balance, make sure that yeast doesn't get too unruly. After that salt has been added, I then take a look at the dough that's forming. And I make a judgment call. Do I need 1/2 cup of bread flour? Do I need a little less? Do I need a little more? So I then add that remaining 1/2 cup of flour and let it mix. And after that bread dough is all situated, I'm going to take it out and put it onto my counter space. I'm going to dump it out, make sure there's nothing left in the bowl, and then I'm going to start working that dough by hand. This will give me the best outlook on the consistency. So as you can see, this dough has a very shaggy appearance to it. And as we mix it, it'll come together. So I'm going to roll it, and it's very sticky. And this one actually looks like I could add a little bit of extra flour to it. Not a lot, just a tiny bit extra. And as I incorporate that in, I then go to mix the dough. Because I did a good portion of this with the mixer, I don't have to do as much by hand. But again, kneading it is not a difficult feat. You don't want to overwork the bread until it's too hard and firm. All you want to do is incorporate it so that it has an even consistency. And if you notice by the time frame, that's not too long. Now that the bread has this look to it, I'm going to go on ahead and add it to a plastic or glass bowl. We want to do that instead of a metal bowl because the bread can take on a bit of that metallic taste, depending on the metal that you're using. Some people don't notice it, but I think it has a negative effect on the rising of the dough. Once it's put into a bowl, it's then brought over to the oven. I don't have a proofing drawer or anything fancy like that, so I'm just going to put it directly on top of the stove. I'm going to turn the oven on to 350 degrees to make sure that the dough has ideal conditions. I'm also going to add a towel that has been moistened. This gives the dough a nice warm and wet atmosphere to rise in the best conditions. And as I show you here, I've got one that I made earlier. So I'm going to do 2 batches today. It just seems like 6 bagels don't last long enough in this household. And we eat them far faster before they even go near to being bad. So I'm going to do 2 batches today.
Well, that's all good and dandy, but I've got too much of a busy schedule to deal with baking bread in my free time. I don't even know how you got the time.
I have an active 1-year-old and I'm pregnant. So time management is always a gamble. Ah, look at that. Aren't those beautiful? You can see the indents that I put in there, bloop, are going to stay because this dough is now completely risen. It's been a couple of hours. It's now afternoon, about 2:30. So this dough has been sitting and growing in the meantime. I've got a couple of pans all set up. The one is a little bit no stick. This one, I've got this silicone baking thing, which I really like. You could also use parchment paper. Never really had too much trouble with the buns actually sticking to a pan, but I like to take precautions. So, one of the key things I really do love while working with this is having a lovely knife of sorts, and this helps to cut the bread into pieces. Alright, so now we're going to take the dough, we're going to knock it right on out of there. Now the container itself does get a little bit of residue, so I like to get all that dough. I don't like to waste any of it. And a lot of people at this point would punch the dough, but we're going to be breaking it apart in a couple of ways. So first off, I'm going to use this knife here, and we're going to split that in half, all the way down. Makes a nice clean cut. Then I'm going to take this, and I'm going to slightly roll it into kind of a bun, like a hot dog bun. And then I'm going to split that into 3 pieces. If you had a scale, you could measure each of these to make sure that you're close to being accurate in size. But it's just for the house. Nobody cares. I'm going to pull this apart. I'm going to roll it in on itself. So you see as I take that and I'm going to roll that dough. And I'm going to feel that tighten up in my hand as I start to just kind of spin it around. And I'm clamping it shut down on the bottom. So I'm kind of spinning it like that. And I've got that dough nice and tight. Now this is not your traditional bagel shape. This is just a roll. Now I prefer doing the roll versus having the hole in it. I haven't noticed any inconsistencies when I bake them. I notice that it cooks all the way through, and I just like having a bagel bun without a hole in it. However, if you did want to do that, you take that and you're going to take your fingers and you're going to press in to make a hole in the middle like that. And then we're just going to do this and do a little bit of that, and there we go. We've got a nice little bagel shape. So either or will work for you. I just prefer to have it in a bun. I'm going to leave that one be. So we're going to continue on with this, and I'm going to form the rest of these into buns. Oh, look at that. Yep. Because I'm peeling this around, it kind of takes that punch down factor. I don't like to overwork the dough, and this works out for me, but a different method might work for somebody else. That's just a nice quick way that I can form that. Right. So then we're going to go on ahead and we're going to fill up this pan. So we got the one there. So I made 6 each time I make a batch of this. So I've got 6 bagels to make. And then that gives me, if I do 2, then I can get a good 12 going on. Now after we form the dough, we will want it to bench rest for about 10-15 minutes. Allows the dough to breathe and rest and rise just a little bit more. I've got this pan here. Now that is boiling, and that's what we want. Now the boiling water helps to make the bread, once it's baked, a little bit chewier, which is pretty awesome. But this is just water, and I'm going to carefully dump those in. I can fit all 6 in here. Now I'm going to use my nice tongs, and so we are going to make sure as these float around that we spin them so that we get all sides cooking evenly. As the water gets hotter, the bread will float, so you do want to flip it halfway through. I'm going to have that go for about a minute, up to 2 minutes. Flip them, do another 2 minutes, and then we're going to put them on the pan, and then we're going to heat them in the oven that's already been preheated to 425, and we're going to let those bake for about 20 to 22 minutes. Of course, again, depending on your altitude and depending on your oven, that could fluctuate.